Hey folks, welcome to another episode of 5 to 15 with Musickers. I'm your host Jason DeCristofaro, and I'm here with Al Watsky. Al, thank you so much for being with us
You're
today.
very welcome. Great to be here.
Yeah, Al is the owner and mastermind behind Fretted Instrument Services.
That's
I think I got
correct.
that right. He's a fantastic jazz guitarist and composer as well. Wears a lot of different hats, but we're here to talk today about his work as a fretted instrument, specifically guitars, and the work he does repairing and restoring them.
And banjos and mandolins.
Oh, there you go, banjos and mandolins. Well, I thought I saw a little mandolin over there on the case.
Yep.
So, the big question I have, Al, you have a pretty prolific career as a performer. You've played with a lot of people, worked over the years in many settings, toured. When did the shift happen to also include repairing and restoring fretted instruments? When did that happen? How did that happen?
Well, I first attended Berkeley in Boston, and I was there for a couple of years, and just like a lot of people, I hired out of the school. I got myself a job, worked that job as a musician, a guitarist, for as long as that, that thread, I followed that thread. And when I sort of was at the other end of that, I found myself in Denver at that point. So I worked my way out to Denver as a musician and continued to work as a musician in Denver, and was involved in nightclub work, principally playing with African Americans in nightclubs and resorts, and kind of realized that I wanted to go back to school. So I moved back east and auditioned for conservatory and earned a diploma, conservatory diploma in classical guitar. And so I was all this time getting through school. The second time around, I was teaching. And it was principally private teaching, although I did do some classroom teaching, middle school classroom teaching, and really decided that I didn't want to do that as a career. And so I wanted to step away from teaching, and the first thing I did was jump into the single event business in Manhattan, basically the hotel circuit. So you're playing the Hotel Pierre and the Hilton Ballroom and the Waldorf, and it was 15-piece orchestra, and it was unionized, and so it was unionized work. I could have pension and benefits. If I could do 3 jobs a week, that was certainly going to be enough a quarter to have health care.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a few years and realized that I really had no interest in that music at all. And then at that point I said, what can I do that's not going to make me crazy, that I already sort of have a skill base in? And because I had trade skills, just from doing model building and radio building when I was a kid, and all these things came rather easily to me. I was a woodworker as a hobbyist.
Yeah.
So, and I had been doing my own repairs for years on my own instruments. I had a friend of mine who I'd been in the Cub Scouts with, who after high school, rather than run around being a musician as I did, he moved to Sweden and got a job with a Swedish guitar company and learned the trade. And so at this point he had come back to America, and he had a little business in a suburb in New Jersey. And I called him up one day and I said, Daryl, his name was Daryl, his name still is Daryl. I said, Daryl, give me a job. And he said, oh, Al, guys who went to college don't do this.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm going to do this. So my plan was to work for Daryl and continuing to do all the things that I had done all along, which was teach and play the guitar. And so I started learning with Daryl, and very quickly I understood that I could really just watch him do something and then do it. No matter how technical it was, I could just do it. and I already had experience with finishes and other woodworking things, and so it didn't take me long to develop enough skills to be what they call a tech. And so I was almost immediately teching. You know, give me a little guidance, I was teching. So I got some jobs working for companies, manufacturing companies, American manufacturing companies and a Japanese company. And I was working as a consultant and a repair person for their endorsers. And while I was doing that, I was also working for a resale, a classical guitar resale operation in Manhattan. So I was doing all these things at the same time, just moving it all forward, all at the same time, and still playing a lot. And just developed the trade that way. My principal personal interest is in classical guitars, and so I made myself known to everyone that I knew in the classical guitar business, and they saw that the work was good, and it just kept on going. And I still, you know, even since relocating to Western North Carolina, I still have trade from all of those people. They're sending me their things. So it's a matter of building up trust and skill bases. But that's how it sort of came about.
That's amazing. So you had this whole other slew of careers, really. You're doing a lot of other things with education and playing. And essentially you went into an apprenticeship sort of situation with your friend Darryl.
Yep.
And how long did that process take, and how long to learn all these different skills in this new area?
I worked with Darryl for several years and kept in touch with him and just kept on working. And so I would work for him, and I would simultaneously, very often it's not unusual in this sort of trade, especially if you're in a metropolitan area, to work for several different shops at the same time. And you'll do Tuesday at one place and Wednesday at another place. And so I did that for a number of years.
Learn different approaches from each craftsperson.
From each craftsperson, and you ask a lot of questions. I was lucky enough to have friends who were, you know, nationally and internationally known builders who knew me, and we had mutual friends and associations, and so I could, if I had a question, I could call. Or if I was working for a company that manufactured the product, we'll have to call it a product, you know, if I was working for that company, I could call their people up and get guidelines from them, and they would just step you through it. Oh, here's the guideline. This is what we want.
Yeah.
This is how this is done. This is our way. And so you keep on asking those questions over a period of decades, and, you know, if you can execute the answers, well, yay, you know.
So building a relationship with those different manufacturers and distributors and learning, okay, this is what this person wants in their instrument, and this is what this person wants.
Yeah, that is the way the instruments get maintained and set up is a sort of another layer. It's also a sensitivity, because these instruments are made out of wood. It's a sensitivity to that material, the stresses that they're under when they're under string tension. And all of those things, there are numbers, you know, you can reduce it to a number, but it's also a feel thing, you know, and you acquire the skills, you know. There are things that people said to me 35 years ago that still, you know, resonate today, you know, like I'll be working and I'll go, oh, and
well, it's an art form.
Yeah.
It's an art form, it's a craft, and, you know, you learn sort of the nuances, and you get better each time you do it, I guess.
You want to elevate it, and you learn by your own mistakes. You know, there are a lot of things that are acceptable, and then there are other things that raise that acceptability up to a different level, which becomes ethereal. And, you know, you know, this is now extraordinary, and that's nice, you know, if that happens, you know, that's nice when that happens.
You mentioned earlier, so woodworking, you already had some background with that, and you mentioned with transistor radio, so I guess you also had some electrical background. What skills, for anybody who might be interested in going into guitar repair, restoration, what skills are sort of the must-have foundational skills?
Well, you know, the way people are trained these days in the trade, it still boils down to tool, skill, and skill acquisition. So you would be well advised to be able to sharpen a tool.
Yeah.
You have to take measurements. You have to be able to saw and cut things so that they're true and plumb.
Right.
You know, and you have to have a good eye. You have to have a certain amount of equipment. But the equipment is not as much, is not as important as your sensitivity to the materials. And the materials, if you seek to allow the materials to speak to you, they'll tell you how they want to be treated. And that's sort of that's where the talent comes in. Some people are talented in these regards and some people aren't. And so, you know, talent will always out, but it's also a matter, you know, just of building trust. You have to trust yourself. You have to trust, the customer has to trust you. You know, it's all about that.
Well, like you said about the trust with the materials you're working with, and it's this, spiritual might not be the right word, but you are building this connection with the wood you're working with and all the materials.
Yeah. You have to, that's sort of an innate thing. Some people have that. Now, of course, if someone's trying to get into the industry, there are ways to do that. There are places like the Gallup School. There's an online group called the Luth Group, which is a play on the name luthier, luthier. So they Luth, Looth, the Luth Group. That's on the internet, and that's an international consortium of tradesmen at every level. So you got absolute beginners to people who have, you know, international reputations, and they're building and they're restoring and they're repairing. And so there are, you know, ways to do that. But the industry, you know, if you have gone to a place like the Gallup School or applied yourself in some way and have had trade experience, you can possibly get a job in the industry working in a manufacturing facility for these instruments, because the guitar business isn't, if nothing, it's an industry.
It's pretty big.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us, I guess, to my last question, and we're running out of time. There's so many things I want to talk to you about because this is a fascinating world to me. But you are your own business owner in an industry where you do have larger manufacturers, like you mentioned.
Yep.
What are some of the things you've learned as being a small business owner in this very large industry doing the specific thing that you do?
Well, if I was to start it over again and I weren't a player, a musician, I would probably, my advice would be to go to work for a brick and mortar business and try to get some skills there. And if I were to do this again, I would probably just make a business. I'd find myself a silent partner and a second. There would be a three-man business.
Right.
So it'd be me, my partner who was also a hands-on guy, probably a sales guy, and then my third guy who was the money guy.
Right.
And then
and you could just focus on the
and that would be the way to do that. And you know, you really need a sort of you need a metropolitan area to do that. That's why, you know, in more rural areas, you see more individual builders, and there's a lot of guys squirreled up in their shop, you know, building, you know, and they might build 12 instruments a year, you know, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But to me, it's kind of like the guitar trade, the violin trade rather, where you meet a lot of people who've trained very rigorously in violin building, and if they probably don't go a decade where they build one violin. Because there's so many violins, there's so many guitars.
Yeah.
Somebody has to maintain them, and best advice would be to try to develop a strategy to find a specialty.
Yeah.
Which is what I do with the classical guitar. It's a specialty. And that's, you know, I'm passionate about the classical guitar, and so, you know, that helps. A little passion, you know.
Yeah.
It helps.
Real quick before we go, how can people find out about you and your business and what you do?
Well, you can just Google search Al Watsky Fretted Instrument Service, and there's a little website up there that has some pictures of the work that I've done over the last a little while, and it's simple enough.
That's wonderful. Al,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Have a great one, y'all.